Good afternoon. We are the Memoir writing group, and we're very pleased that you came to listen to some of our stories today. We meet every other Tuesday, well, twice a month on Tuesdays. You're very welcome to join us if you have a hankering to write down some of the stories from your memories. We always have a very good time. And if you want to, after you hear some of our stories, if you want to read more, in the Timbercrest Library, there are a few volumes of some of the stories that we've gathered together over the years. You can sit there and enjoy yourself reading them. So let us begin. I'm going to read Carol Burkett's story for her. Glad that Carol could come because she had a tooth extracted an hour or two ago. So Carol's piece is entitled, My Favorite Summer Experience. The launch of the Russian satellite Sputnik had a lot to do with one of the most interesting and enjoyable summers I can ever remember. What's the connection, you ask? Well, even if you don't ask, I'll tell you. It was during the Cold War that Russia rocketed to the lead with the launch of Sputnik, a basketball-sized satellite. It was the first man-made object to orbit the Earth. In an effort to compete in the space race, one of the ways the United States attempted to do this was to send science teachers back to school to get more education in science. Since my husband Paul taught physics as well as other science courses, he was eligible to apply for grants to take more science courses. He applied to several places, but the University of Washington in Seattle was the place he chose. So that summer, Carol and her family packed up their small camper and with our three small boys headed for Seattle. Since we lived in such cramped quarters, we spent most of our time outdoors. The boys made friends with the other kids in the trailer court, and there were lots of interesting things to do and see while Paul was in class. One highlight was the Seattle Sea Fair, which included a parade complete with pirates. We also got to go up in the Space Needle on the 4th of July, where we watched the fireworks. Paul decided to sell the camper in Seattle at the end of summer. I wasn't much for the idea, as I envisioned our three boys, plus all the contents of the trailer, in our car on the way home. But he prevailed, and we sold the camper to a nice young Italian-American family, with the agreement that we would stay in the camper until Paul was done with his classes. They even had us over for a meal of spaghetti. Several weeks later, we decided to take our camper out to the Olympic Peninsula over the weekend. We could hear the Pacific Ocean crashing against the rocks below our campsite. We loved the experience so much that Paul suggested that the boys and I could stay there all week while he went back to school in Seattle. Then he would come and get us the following weekend. It just so happened that during the week when the boys and I were on the Olympic Peninsula, the man who bought the camper drove past our trailer court and saw that our camper was gone. I imagine he was rather upset, since he had paid for all or part of it. He thought he had been taken, but eventually learned that we had been camping elsewhere that week. So it all came to a happy ending, except for the trip home. It was as bad or worse than I had envisioned. Our car was so overloaded that I had to carry the pet turtle in a bowl on my lap all the way back to Indiana. But was all worth it for the wonderful summer we had in Seattle.
I'm going to write about going to school. I'm Roberta McMaster, and I'm new to this group. And however, I've written in the past, and so that I'm going to write about going to school and first grade. As a child of 6, it was deemed the right time. Off to school to hear school bells chime. I suppose we wrote the alphabet and colored between the lines. Writing wasn't fun then, that darned left hand of mine. Slanting the paper to the left just would not work. But when I tipped it to the right, I heard the rustle of her dress. Down the aisle, with ruler in hand, rap on the knuckles of, oh, the distress. The fun part of school in these early years was running and ball playing amid yells and cheers and listening to stories I'd remember for years. As I got older, I found a joy in writing my feelings about friends and those boys. Under the covers by flashlight beam, my pencil or pen oft kept by my bed to record my thoughts or midnight dreams. My mom wrote poetically at holiday time. Her talent I saw as loving rhyme. The birthdays, the valentines, full of frilly hearts, and more fun to receive than any Hallmark. The notes at college, full of news, felt like a visit and cured the blues. Mom's cards were special. How I wished I could write such interesting verse or words that seemed right. The writings required after books that were read were not happy moments to do them. I dread. I remember selecting a jacket for info, rearranged the synopses written by pros, thinking that the teacher would never know. Naturally, the results were less than unique, and grades were not great. Just passing, I'd squeak. As college came, and with it demands, I found that my pen could work in my hands. Yes, still a lefty, with my page tilting right, I found words my friend and I like to write. I read books for children and think I could author a clever little story, maybe about Arthur. Like some writings are whimsical, like Shel Silverstein, while others are classics, like Jack and his beans. But sometimes I read them, I plan to take time to write that kid's book, the one I'll call mine.
My name is Mary Earl, and we had to write a poem, and so I wrote this poem, but I wrote it for a friend who was having trouble being a widow. Alone. The room may be crowded, there may be hundreds of people, or there may be only 3. It does not matter. I am alone. There are no empty chairs, every seat is filled. To my right and to my left, every inch of the room is occupied. It does not matter. I am alone. I am one, only one, and in a universe of couples, I am alone. There is no hand to hold, no laugh to share. There is no one to see the tear in my eye. I am alone. And then, ever so softly, a memory brushes my tear away, and the sound of a long-forgotten joy echoes in my heart. And my hand opens quickly and reaches out and grabs a past I do not want to let go of. And there is no one there. I am alone. A memory, a forgotten joy, a past I do not want to let go of. It is then I realize I am alone, but I am not. I share the very air I breathe with a universe of couples and a room full of people with 3 or hundreds. In one heartbeat, I understand that I am not alone. I may walk through a door by myself. I may enter a room by myself. I may sit in a chair by myself. I may make decisions by myself. I may cry and read and cook and eat and work and play and rest by myself. But I am never alone. A past I do not want to let go of surrounds me and accompanies me to my future. I am never alone. Children, grandchildren are forever in my heart. I am never alone. A friend writes in the middle of the night, and I am never alone. And my soul hears a mighty whisper, my child, you are never, never alone.
Kathy Metzger. When I was a student at the John Herron Art School, there wasn't a building dedicated to the school. We had classes in the former Museum of Art and in various buildings in the vicinity. One of those buildings was a coffee house about a block away from the museum building. I worked in the art school office as a work-study student. One day, a message came for a professor who was teaching in the coffee house. I set off on foot to deliver the message to him. On my way back to the office, I noticed a police car tracking me. The officers called to me, so they wanted. I went over to find out what they wanted. It turned out that they thought I might be a working girl, a rather ludicrous idea given that I was dressed in a paint-spotted overall. They told me, however, that a female in that neighborhood was very likely to be a prostitute. Once I had convinced them that I had no such expectations, they offered to drive me back to the school's main building, an offer which I readily accepted.
I am Marie Willoughby. In January, we wrote about a success that we have had. Right after we moved to Timbercrest, I was invited to join the chapel planning committee. I put them off a few months in order to get acclimated to living here, and then I joined the group in September of 2009. At that time, Olden Mitchell was chairman, and his wife, Doris Miller, was the secretary to the committee. There were 9 other members. At each monthly meeting, the secretary provided a list of prospective chapel speakers and a worksheet to fill in with the decisions made. She brought her double card file box holding contact information for the speakers. A large card went in the alphabetical planning, and a smaller card went into the monthly planning. After the committee reviewed the confirmations made for the next couple months, we went down the speaker list and filled in the worksheet for the 3rd month ahead. So that September, we were planning for December. This process hasn't changed much since then, except now we're just doing it 2 months ahead. At the end of the planning meeting, each committee member then needed to have the secretary pull the card for each person they were to contact and get contact information from her. This was time-consuming, to say the least. After almost 2 years of doing this, I asked Doris to let me borrow the card files so I could make a digital and then a printed packet of the contract information. To her, this was precious stuff. She allowed me to take home only about 25 cards at a time, which I did. I continued borrowing cards from the box until I had at least 200 or more of them copied into my computer. The cards do contain important information besides the name, address, and telephone numbers, and by then email addresses. Each card notes when that person spoke in chapel here, and in the alphabetical file, the suggested month to invite them back to speak again. In 2011, I printed copies of the contact information and made a packet for each member on the committee. They were very grateful. Doris may have been hurt that she wasn't needed so much anymore. However, her record keeping on that cards is vital. In 2012, I was tapped to become the secretary of the chapel planning group and have continued to this day. Changes can easily be made as we add persons, delete some, and update information. Before I moved to the manor over a year ago, I had copies from every year that I printed, and I may still have them, but I don't know where. And here are some packets from the last couple years. To me, this project has been a success, and it's one that I continue to plan doing.
I'm Joanne Shull, and this is a gerbil episode. We moved so often when my daughters were small that pets were out of the question. But when my daughters were in 3rd and 1st grades, a Christmas visit to my brother's family resulted in a love affair with cuddly little kittens. We were fairly settled at that point, so the girls brought home 2 kittens as their first pets. Alas, kittens grow and become adventuresome. Our cats, a whole series of them, specialized in disappearing or getting hit on the road in front of our house. Cats brought grief. A solution seemed to offer itself. My older daughter, then in 5th grade, discovered gerbils. She thought they were darling little creatures. I thought they looked like little mice, and the word darling didn't apply. But my daughter found a free source of gerbils with someone who was willing to teach her about their care. For me, the fact that they would be confined to a cage was a major benefit. So I agreed to give gerbils a try. My daughter brought home from school 2 male gerbils. Her source had shown her how to take care of them and how to sex them, and confirmed that these gerbils were both male. My daughters both loved the little creatures and took good care of them. They were the first stop when the girls got home from school. The girls seemed to enjoy preparing food for them and experimented with finding their favorite foods. They even picked up the gerbils and let them run up and down their arms. They also let them explore the laundry room counter under close supervision. My daughters were enchanted by the gerbils. And then there was a surprise one afternoon when the girls got home from school. There was a litter of tiny little baby gerbils in the cage. Obviously, the original gerbil owner wasn't good at sexting gerbils. But the babies were cute. They enjoyed watching them exploring the cage and doing amazing things. The girls grew to love the little gerbils, and they cared for them diligently. Oops. Sure enough, there was another little litter. This time, there was less excitement, and the cage was getting crowded with little gerbils. The girls were growing less enchanted. My older daughter finally loaded up some of the gerbils and visited a local pet store to see if they would buy some of the gerbils to sell to other children. The pet store did take them with very little money offered for them, but the problem was eased. Oops, another litter. My daughters asked their classmates if anyone would like a free gerbil. A few friends said they would take 1 or 2, but then their mothers said no. A second trip to the pet store didn't find a buyer this time. The owner claimed that he was overrun with gerbils too. Then my daughters discovered some headless young gerbils in the cage. Apparently, the mother or older siblings decided their cage was too crowded, and they took care of the problem in a typical gerbil way that thoroughly sickened my daughters. We were in crisis mode. The first babies were getting old enough to have babies themselves, and there were already too many gerbils. The girls bought a second cage and tried to separate the males from the females, but this was largely guesswork. 2 cages crowded the small laundry room where the gerbils lived, and I was ready to get rid of them. We found a solution. The weather was warmer now, and so we moved the gerbil cages into the garage. At first, all was well. The gerbils seemed fine in their new environment, and the girls were still taking good care of them, though it was becoming a chore. But it wasn't very long until the gerbils started dying. While none of us were very enthused about these little pets, we still didn't want to kill them. We had long discussions about what was happening. Was the food bad? The water? Didn't they get enough light? Were they too cold after all? Finally, when we were down to just a few gerbils, it finally occurred to me. Obviously, we kept the car in the garage. The car emitted gas fumes. We were gassing the little Germans to death. Somehow the girls managed to give the few remaining gerbils to unsuspecting friends. Sadder but wiser, our gerbil episode ended. And then came the guinea pigs.
I'm Darlene Hunt, and this is my response to the topic, what would a lazy day be like? Unless there is a reason to leave the house before 9 a.m., or there is a house or holiday project that requires organization and energy for several hours, most days begin in a lazy, or a better term might be a relaxed mode. The ever-present list is waiting in the kitchen for a quick overview sometime within the first half hour of waking, and what happens after that can depend on many factors. What would determine a call for a lazy day, or at least part of a day primarily, would be whether the body is severely stiff and achy or fairly normal and agile. The weather outside can easily put a damper on some proposed activities, indoor or outdoor. In thinking about what a lazy day would be for me, I've concluded that it would have to involve an activity that I enjoy and which still provides a feeling of accomplishment, even if it is just recovering from some general malaise. For that purpose, I have a stack of magazines, greatly reduced in number since we moved, of all kinds. Among them are such titles as Good Housekeeping, Family Circle, Better Homes and Gardens, Real Simple, Living, yes, a few copies of Martha's iconic magazine, Midwest Living, Traditional Home, Newsweek from the week of 9/11, and also some weightier ones requiring real reading, such as Time, First Things, Berean Searchlight, and Bible Doctrines to Live By. It is doubtful that any magazine that arrived at my home has ever been read from cover to cover. At any given time, perhaps 6 have been subscribed to at once, but most of the time they don't even get looked at for a couple weeks or even months after they've arrived. There is some selective method used for keeping certain magazines, which I've never really thought about. Obviously, it's a keeper if it is colorful, has recipes, and pictures of plants, gardens, and home designing and furnishing ideas. Ideas for keeping the body healthy are good to keep around. They don't have to be adhered to. Sometimes just the idea presented gives the body the lift it needs. It's especially enjoyable on one of those lazy days, lazy parts of a day, to actually read a whole article and appreciate the expertise of the writer in any of the above-mentioned magazines. This leisurely part of a lazy day with the magazines doesn't happen very often. However, during our move, I recognized that a time of rest was imperative. Since moving here, I have resorted to this lazy day plan a couple times. As a kind of prescriptive remedy, it probably fails, since when the leisure period is over, I find several pieces of torn out articles, recipes, and pictures that I want to file away for future reference lying next to me, which means that a potential new idea or two may pop up on a daily or weekly list of things to do. This small pile of ripped pages remain in my vision somewhere near a wicker basket on the kitchen counter for months, and gradually, one by one, most get dumped into the wastebasket. The survivors live in a file that has become enjoyable perusing material on that occasional lazy part of another day.
Wendy Metzger, and one time we were writing about grandparents. As a child, I did not appreciate the diversity of my grandparents, nor did I realize the gift it was to have them live nearby. I can only recall one great-grandparent, Louis Benton Floor, lived back east and we rarely saw him. He was great-granddaddy Floor with a beard, for he was a Dunkard brethren and wore the garb. I remember him being especially warm and friendly with us kids, even inviting the little ones onto his lap. My grandmother Flor seemed aloof to me. I felt she spoke down to us, and I do not remember her as warm and cuddly. She was a remarkable woman with extraordinary accomplishments, like achieving a master's degree, teaching at the college level, and being a missionary in Nigeria. As an older adult, she traveled throughout Europe with the Wabash Women's Choir. I viewed her as stately and accomplished, but not very relatable, partly because I once overheard her refer to me as an elephant. Being a chubby, self-conscious child, I chose to distance myself from her. I may not yet have started school when Mother needed to farm us kids out while she was hospitalized for a surgery. A sister and I were to stay with Grandmother Floor. Although I was not very comfortable with this decision, having my sister with me and having the prospect sweetened by the ability to ride our tricycles and scooters on a sidewalk all around the block, I allowed this to happen. My grandma Metzger was not snuggly, but in her quiet way, she oozed love and acceptance. Iva did not finish school, married at 16, and had 12 pregnancies. In 1944, she reported that one day she canned 21 quarts of peaches, made 5 pints of peach butter, picked and canned 16 quarts of tomatoes, picked and canned 13 quarts of pickles, and put 8 quarts in a crock for dill pickles. All of this on top of her other daily jobs. She never learned to drive a car, and she was usually available to help us shell peas, snap beans, and chop tomatoes. Somehow, she managed to convey to all 34 of her grandchildren that each of us was precious to her. She always had a glass dish on the buffet filled with chocolate stars, and her fudge was legendary. Between my 2 grandmas, one traveled extensively, the other did not go to town on her own. One found cooking a chore, the other is known for baking 6 pies every Saturday. One moved 3 states away from her family's home, the other stayed in her community. One was always referred to as grandmother, the other grandma. They both were available and present in my life and exemplified a form of diversity in my immediate family. I am certain that each had a mentoring role in my life.
I'm Eileen Flory. It was the 1980s, and our Quaker meeting was providing sanctuary to a political refugee from El Salvador. As we helped Manuel with his legal case, there came a time when he needed to get some official papers from the Salvadoran consulate in New York, so he and I flew east. After spending the night at a friend's apartment in Brooklyn, we set out to find the consulate. Neither of us had been to New York before, and it took a while, but eventually we found ourselves wandering around an area that had a number of consulates, some of them Latin American, each with a small crowd of people hanging out on the sidewalk in front, waiting for their turns inside. Suddenly, from a block and a half away, Manuel spotted our destination. I was skeptical and asked how he could tell it was the Salvadoran consulate. He grinned and exclaimed, "Conozco a mi gente, Eileen. I know my people." Sure enough, it was the right place, and an hour later we walked out, mission accomplished, and ready to see some New York sights. Thank you so much for coming.